Hey kids, welcome back. So here's what we are doing. We're going to get ready to put in our prop shaft. Now something I want to talk about with this hull real quick. You'll notice that my engine should probably be right here because here's where your carb intake is. I'm not really sure why they designed this boat this way, but it's an absolute bitch to get your fingers in here, to get your motor mounts in. Your pull start ends up way back here. Even if you use a pulley start, it's very cramped, and they put their rib in the wrong spot. It's like right here. I will literally have to cut this out to make it work properly. I can do it this way and keep my center of gravity good. The only problem is I will probably have to cut a hole in the top of the canopy for the spark plug. So, to me, it's worth it because yeah, I'll have a little bit of a doohickey sticking out of my canopy, but the rest of everything's going to be easier. Maintenance is going to be easier. My center of gravity is going to be okay because I'm using a skinny build. I'm not going to have all this weight everywhere, and we can always put a little bit of nose weight in there if we need to, but center of gravity is actually not off that much. So anyway, we're going to do the shaft. I've already annealed it. Now you'll notice I actually did a patch because I don't know what I was thinking when I ordered my stuffing tube, but I ordered it too short, but I did luckily have two. So I basically just brazed the two together, and I will feather that down a little bit later. So what we're going to do, when you anneal this, and I didn't do this on video because it's just a pain in the butt, what you want to do is take a propane torch. I actually use a MAP gas torch because it's much faster, and you heat this up to the point where it starts bluing. Do not do it to the point of glowing orange or anything like that. You want to get it blued and then just let it cool slowly. Do not quench it. Let it cool to room temperature for half an hour or whatever. It won't even take that long. And basically what you're doing is you're giving the stress relief, so you'll be able to bend this by hand. Now, we're not going to be bending it in big 180s or anything like that, but we are going to put an S-bend in here. So what we did was we found relative center. So you got 5-inch rails here, and basically 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches relative center on the transom, and I did temporarily mount the strut because we're going to have to get everything centered up. So what we're going to do now is you have to figure you want your prop shaft better too long than too short. So we're not going to worry about length on this just yet, but where you're going to put your S-bend. So if I don't put an S-bend in here, if I just go gradual, you're going to have a lot of shafts sticking up here. It's really not the best way to do it. So I'm actually going to put in an S that goes like this, and we're going to put a hole right around here, and we're going to slide this guy through, and then we're going to epoxy it. In order to epoxy this in properly, and I am going to use a Dremel tool for that, when you epoxy this in, you're going to want to rough this up with sandpaper so you got some coarseness to it, and then slide it in through here. Then we're going to take packing tape, just good old-fashioned clear tape or painter's tape like here, and we're going to tape around the bottom of the shaft hole that we put in right down here, and then when we fill it with epoxy, it's not going to ooze out all over the place. So not going to do the bend on camera because you really only get one shot at it, and I don't feel like fucking it up today. So but we're just going to put a little bit of an S here and then a friction bend up into the strut. Once I feel semi-happy with that, it's not a big deal. If you fuck it up, it's $2 worth of tubing. Just keep doing it till you get it right. So anytime you bend tubing, you have to have a mandrel in it if you're going to, something with pressure on the inside diameter holding the OD out. But we're not doing extreme bends. And since I annealed it, it should be soft enough. I should be able to bend a nice S-curve. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to 3D print. Instead of putting a wood block in here and just gooping the shit out of it, I'm going to find my relative angle, and I'm going to 3D print a little wedge that's going to get glued in there for shaft support. So it's going to be pretty cool. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and do the S-curve in here, and then I'm also going to put the hole in the hull, and we will be right back. Bye. All right, here we go. So that's what we did. We went ahead, always anneal these first, because what you want to do is use your thumbs as support and then bend your S-curve in there. So if you see, I'll stick this down here, rotate it up, bam. That's going to be about Perfect. That was a good guess. Don't worry about not making this. I made that hole pretty wide. That's okay. You're going to be filling it with epoxy anyway. Doesn't matter. We're going to tape it. Now, in order to set your shaft, what you want to do is you want to have your flex cable cut to the right length. So what we've got here is we've got, like I said in the other video, you want to leave a gap between your strut and your collet, at least the diameter of your shaft. So in this case, 1/4 inch, that's close enough. And we are going to slide it through our shaft, and we're going to have to cut this. But first we're going to have to cut the shaft, because the shaft's too damn long. So we're just going to cut the shaft off past the point. It's okay. We'll just do it there. And I am just going to use, you can use a Dremel. I have a fancy dancy little pipe cutter here. Because when you go to measure out your shaft length, you want to make sure that you're utilizing that curve, because obviously that curve is going to take up distance, and you don't want to cut it. You don't want to just measure it straight and be like, oh shit, I'm too short. So that's what you want to do. So what I do with these, you can pick up a little pipe cutter like this. I actually do usually use the Dremel for this with a disc, obviously. No big deal. Definitely a lot faster than doing it this way, but whatever. So then what I do, I take cutter to spline this, bam. All right, so let's take our shaft. The shaft, I know we're gonna have to cut 2 or 3 inches off. We're gonna put this through our tube. It's not gonna be much though, okay? Then we're gonna slide it through here into your collet, and you can see right there it's too long. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and measure out to here. We're going to cut the tube a little bit more. I just wanted to get an idea before I went ahead and did this. Measure twice, cut once. Then once I get the length that I want, because I want a little bit more length on this tube here, after we get that, then we're going to measure out the flex cable and cut it. So I'll be right back. Now we have got our shaft in, and that alignment looks about perfect. Now mind you, we can still bend it a little bit if we need to. Now it doesn't have to be 1000% perfect just yet. And then we've got it, if you can see here, we've got it going into our strut. I have my strut just set to any old height that really doesn't matter. And you'll notice when you slide this in, there was no curve, and then I put my fingers under here, gently pulled it up, and you're done. No big deal. So now what we're going to do is we have to cut the shaft. Now the reason we need the shaft cut is you don't want to epoxy this in until your shaft is set here in your strut and here in your collet. That's going to help keep your shaft aligned. So in order to do that, first we need to have the shaft set to the right depth. So let's go ahead and do this. Going in rough because the end of my, it's not treated yet, so that's okay. So that is seated all the way into the collet. We want to have about 1/4 of an inch extra here. So take your measuring tape, calipers, whatever you're going to do, and I'm just going to measure from there to about there. A little bit extra is not too bad. So we're looking at 73 mil. I'm going to take off of here. So a lot of times I'll just lock this. I'll take this out, and what we're going to do then is we're going to find a Sharpie marker, and we're going to measure 73. Ain't gotta be perfect, but it's gotta be close, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're just going to take a Dremel tool with a, where is it? Saber blade, like this, thin cut. We're going to stick this in my little hobby vise. We're going to cut that, then we're going to take and we're going to dress the end so it's a little bit tapered so we don't have any friction and scarring going up our copper tube. So let me cut this to length. We'll be right back. All right, that took me all of about 20 seconds. So we cut it off, and then we just give it a little bit of a bevel just to smooth out the edges. Let's see how... Now if you fuck this one up, it's better to fuck up too long than too short, obviously. So make sure this goes in. Should seat. And that, kids, is perfect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, you want to center this shaft a little bit, which we'll get to that in a bit. You want to do that while it's setting, but we're going to dress this area. I'm going to scuff it with some sandpaper on the inside of the hull to give it a little bit more grit, and then we're going to tape the back. We're going to sand and scuff the shaft right in this area so it has grip. Then we're going to reseat this all back in. We're going to make sure we're reasonably centered. Doesn't have to be perfect, but centered as much as you can, because you don't want a trailing keel, obviously. Then we're going to put packing tape or painter's tape on the back, and we're going to fill this up with epoxy. Probably 2 sets of it. We'll see how well it sits. So anyway, a lot of times what I will do as well is I'll mix a little bit of cornstarch, believe it or not, into the epoxy. A very little bit, just to thicken it up, just like you would gravy, and then put it in there, and it gives you a little bit, it keeps it from running, but I don't think we're going to do that today. So let me go ahead and dress this, put tape on the back side around the shaft, and then I'll come in and we'll finish this video up, and then we'll be done. Bam. Here we are. She is set up. Not totally dry, but dry enough to touch. We'll let her sit for an hour, even though it's 5-minute epoxy. The difference between, just for information, between 30-minute cure and 5-minute cure is not, yeah, no shit, it's the cure time. But the reason you use different types is basically for soaking, okay? When you're building a model out of like a Miss Roto Geek rigger or anything out of wood, especially wood, or anything that has porous to it, use 30-minute because it takes longer to set. 30-minute epoxy, at least my stuff, does not dry in 30 minutes. It sets in 30 minutes. It actually takes a few hours to dry. Actually, even overnight is sometimes the best route to go. But what it does, since it takes longer to set, it will soak into wood and really saturate. So anything that's a porous material, things like that, probably going to use 30-minute. And for stuff like this is not porous, either is this. The viscosity isn't really going to make a big difference. So we're going to block, I'm going to make a block. It may be wood, it may be, probably 3D print's easier. I'll 3D print a block for here, and we'll fasten that down, and then that one's pretty much done. We'll peel the tape off the bottom here in a second, and that's going to be about it. Also, be sure that this is as centered as possible here, because you're going to be centered here. So if you're centered here and you're centered here, unless you got some weird ass warping, you should be fine. So this is a 5-inch spread from wall to wall, and so I measured 2.5 inches. I got right to the center of my tube, and 2.5 inches straight to the center of the tube. That should be good. And this is centered already. One quick little note. You'll notice on this hull I've used Sharpie marker. If you ever want to get Sharpie off of anything, use CA Activator. This is Activator for super glue. Watch. Takes Sharpie off like nobody's business. Works great. So I use Sharpie because pencil doesn't work too good on fiberglass gel coat. So I'm not afraid to use Sharpies on this. So either way, that is the easy part. The next thing that we're going to do, oh, real quick before I forget, when you're gluing this bitch in and getting everything set up, make sure your shaft tube is all the way up in your strut. Don't forget that, because if you don't, it'll torque out and rip apart. So you always want to make sure that that is set good and firm deep in there. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to mount the, I'll finish mounting this, and we will also mount the rudder. That's easy enough. Once those two are done, we'll go ahead and do the servos, which that's stupid easy, and the gas tank and all that good stuff. So should be a pretty quick build. Shouldn't be too bad. So until next time, kids, which later on today, keep shining side up. Bye.